All right, starting to see some people trickle in. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on your place in the world and where the sun is. My name is Josh Palmer. I'm your head of content for OnBoard and the ATLAS Leadership Series. As we get more people joining in here, we'll start right on time at the top of the hour, 2 Eastern, 1 p.m. Central. Um, but thank you for joining us. This is going to be a really interesting presentation, really engaging, dynamic content and speaker. How to be the most trustworthy board member with Andrew Sykes. But we'll give folks a few more minutes to filter in here, exactly 60 seconds. If you don't mind holding tight with me here in the green room, so to speak. This is one of the continuing Atlas Thought Leadership Series. We do these thought leadership blogs, or not blogs, webinars once per month. So if you'd like to join us for another one, we do have another great upcoming session that I'll share with you in the slides to follow here. It's about getting your first board seat. So if you don't yet sit on a board, step-by-step concrete action plan for getting your first board seat, what you need to do, who you need to know, how to make the right answers and questions to seeking that role out. Got about 30 more seconds here. A little information about you, the audience. We have a really great mix of industries, everything from healthcare to associations, trade associations, nonprofits, really good mix of job titles and experience levels, everything from CEO to assistant and executive assistant and chief of staff. Saw a couple of VPs in there, saw a couple of really interesting job titles that if I had the time and means to send you an email, I'd ask you about your job because I was really curious about some of the job titles. They seem very specific. All right, we are at the top of the hour, so I'll go ahead and get going. Quick housekeeping items. If you are here for how to be the most trustworthy board member with Andrew Sykes, starting now, you're in the right place, the right time. These are just, we go over these every webinar we do. This is a Zoom webinar, so by default, all members are mute, so you will not show on screen, we won't hear your voice. However, we really do highly encourage you, and Andrew, the presenter today, is really going to be really active and participatory in the chat and the Q&A sections. So if you do have questions, they will be answered in real time if they're germane to the topic we're speaking about today. So please do use those chat and Q&A functions. We will be monitoring. I will be there. And then before we wrap up, before we get into the end of the presentation, we asked just a real quick 10-second feedback. Just how did we do? It's a 5-star rating system. If you give us 4 or 5 stars, that's great. It just gives us a leverage to optimize our performance for the next session. We get this question often. We will send you both the link to the on-demand recording via YouTube. We also send you the slide deck as a PDF as a link. We'll do that to the email that you registered with today. And as I mentioned before, we want to see you again. If you enjoy these types of presentations, this content, we're always interested in doing more. So our next one is May 15th at 2 p.m. Eastern. How to get your first board seat. I hear about this a lot. I'm finally really happy that we have a great coach and board consultant in Glenn Tobe. He's going to actually walk you through how to get a board seat. So if you're at that level of your career where you think the next step is, I want to be a board director, he's got the action plan for you, what you need to do, who you need to know, who you need to be talking to get that board seat. If you're not familiar with OnBoard, a little bit about us. This is a quick brand introduction. We develop and design experiences that make board meetings simple, secure, and effective. So we are board management or board portal software designers. We're happy to serve more than 6,000 board-led organizations across the world in 60 plus countries. We support more than 150,000 meetings per year, which is just mind-boggling to me. And we have 150,000 users as well. So just a lot of folks doing great board meeting work. This is just a quick chestnut from our co-founder and now board chair, Parun Chadha. He tells us there are 3 types of board meetings. There's the board meeting you prepared for, the board meeting you had, and the one you wish you had. And it's our endeavor, our goal to always make sure you have that 3rd type of board meeting. So now to the heart of the presentation, I'm very, very excited to be able to introduce Andrew Sykes. He's a lecturer at Kellogg School of Business. He is the CEO of Habits at Work. He's also the author of a book called The 11th Habit, which is about some of these the things we'll be talking about today. He's actually been on TEDx as well, which I'm really jealous and envious of as well. And he's a professional speaker. Andrew, welcome to the presentation. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me today. I'm excited to get going. Ready when you are, my friend.
Yes, yep. It's all yours. The stage is yours.
Okay, team, welcome. And I know that the least effective way to get to know somebody is over a webinar where I can't see your videos, and therefore we have only one way to communicate, which is in the chat. And so I'd like to begin by inviting you to identify yourself not by name, but with an answer to this question. Scale of 1 to 10, 1 being low, 10 being high, in the chat. How trustworthy are you as a human being, a board member, anyone in life? Scale of 1 to 10, how trustworthy are you? Please put your answer in the chat. 8, 9s, 10s, 8s. Awesome. We're in good company. I trust that you'll stay, that you'll collaborate, that you'll put questions and answers in the chat. And although we reserve 15 minutes for questions, I'm not going to do that at the end. I would rather have them come in as we're speaking. Now, the topic for today is how to be the most trustworthy board member. But the truth is, and the reason I asked you to start with sharing how trustworthy you are is, I believe as human beings, and especially as board members, we have some trust issues, maybe some that you're not aware of. And my goal today is to bring those to life and then to show you why those trust issues also happen to be the greatest opportunity you have to be the most trustworthy board member, dare I say, the most trustworthy human being in every meeting, in every room, every day. If that sounds good to you, hang out and stay with me, because I'd like to start with this idea that we have trust issues. And what do I mean by that? There's a difference between our assessment of how trustworthy we think we are and how trustworthy other people assume us to be. When I was 21, I just recently graduated with a degree in actuarial science. If you don't know what that is, we study mathematics and finance, and it's a difficult degree, and so I left very cocksure that I knew everything I needed to know about business, and in a triumph of courage over wisdom, I started my first business at age 21. And what I discovered 6 months later is having a degree in actuarial science teaches you nothing about how to sell, and I didn't have a single piece of business. But at the 6 month mark, I earned an opportunity to win a piece of business that would quite literally put us on the map. It was from, and you can hear by my accent, I'm South African. It was from one of South Africa's largest businesses. If you've ever bought or been given or own a diamond, you may have gotten it from this company, De Beers. It's a massive global business. At one time, 95% of the world's diamonds came through them. So you can imagine how excited I was to win this business. And so I went to a mentor of mine and I said to her, I have this big shot at winning this business. What is the secret to building trust quickly? And she said to me something that sounded like great advice. You can decide for yourself. She said, Andrew, under promise, over deliver, and document everything. So I took some of her advice. I documented everything in our proposal. Truth be told, I ignored the advice about under promising. I made a huge promise for the work that we would do and the impact it would have. And thankfully, that big promise worked. And we had 6 weeks to produce a piece of work for them, a report, and a strategy for saving an enormous amount of money. And at the end of 6 weeks, I'm happy to say my team had done phenomenal work. And on the big day, I got to present to the board. Now, this is the days before cell phones, so I arrived and I met in the foyer my client. His name was Johan. He was one of the biggest humans I've ever met, but also had one of the quietest voices. He was a very timid man, and I didn't really understand why until we entered the boardroom. I was brimming with enough self-confidence for the both of us. I was wearing a bright purple suit, and he tiptoed into the boardroom, and then I discovered why he was so nervous. It was one of those huge mahogany-clad boardrooms where there were 12 leather-backed chairs. The chairman's was a foot taller than everyone else's. Of course, there were portraits of former chairmans from 150 years on the boardroom walls, and in the corner stood 12 very old white men, board members, in very black suits, sipping high tea. Now, I know you're guessing that I blew that presentation. The truth is I didn't. I crushed it. I breathed life into the results with my stories. I told them how to save more money than the GDP of a small country. And as my pièce de résistance, I shared with them what the next steps were and how easy it was. And I ended by saying, I hope that you guys will take our advice, hire us to implement, and save all of this money. Metaphorically dropped the mic and left, confident that I'd killed it. I went back and told my team about it, and then I waited for the call. And nothing came. Nothing came the next day. So 3 days later, desperate to get an answer, I drove to Johan's office and I walked in, and before I could even sit down, he said, and he had an accent because he spoke Afrikaans, he said, Andrew, I'm sorry, but you've been fired by the board. Now, if you've seen me speaking on stage or you knew me personally, you would know I'm not often at a loss for words. I was temporarily, but I said, Johan, how can we possibly have been fired? We can save tons of money. It was in the billions of dollars. What exactly did I do wrong? And he said, Andrew, you were fired for bad manners. I'm the youngest of 8 kids. My mom taught me wonderful manners. My dad beat them into me. I'm very proud of my manners. And so you can imagine I'm taken back. I'm a little humiliated, and I'm starting to wonder, what exactly did I do wrong? Did I sip my tea wrong? So I asked him, Johan, what did I do wrong? He says, Andrew, at the end of your presentation, you called the board you guys. Nobody calls the board you guys and gets away with it. And I'm thinking, they were 12 males, so not inaccurate. And are you kidding me? You're going to give up this savings, or at least the person that brought it to you, and the opportunity to implement with us over 2 words? And then I suddenly realized I had to go and tell my team that I'd blown this presentation over these tiny 2 words. And I went back to them, told them the story, fuming, and then it hit me. I did have bad manners. From my point of view, from their point of view, the only one that matters. And for a couple of decades, I told that story as a lesson to my teams and to anyone who would listen, that you can do wonderful work, you can build amazing trust through your work, and you can blow it at the 11th hour, in the last comments you make in a meeting. But when I started to study trust, I realized I was wrong all that time. I hadn't blown that in the you guys statement. I had blown it walking in with arrogance as a 21-year-old know-it-all. And I blew my first impression. And that board waited patiently for an hour for the one thing to use as an excuse not to work with me. And that's what I mean by the idea that we have trust issues. Because I believe that every one of us, and I expect everyone on this call, is someone who is worthy of trust. But actually, being worthy of trust and being judged as trustworthy by another person are 2 completely different things. And to demonstrate that, I want to do a little bit more fun in the chat. Here's how we're going to do this. This is the trustworthiness scale that we were talking about earlier. You rated yourself on that. It's from 1, I can't trust you as far as I can throw you, to 10, whatever your gold standard is for your consideration. That might be, this is someone who always tells the truth, who has good intentions, and who always keeps their promises. Now, in the chat, please, I've got a couple of questions for you. On that scale, how much do you trust complete strangers? Never met somebody, you're walking down Main Street in Chicago where I live. How much do you trust strangers? There's some 5s, 4s, 7s, 0s. Heather, I'm with you on that. Trust is a little like a love language. Some of us trust generously and wait for our hearts to be broken. Some of us have had our hearts broken and we don't trust anyone. And that's hearts broken in the business or the personal sense. So it looks like most of us have a low-ish score. Maybe some of you are very trust generous. If I took a rough poll, I would estimate that the average is about a 5 or a 6. So far, so good. Let's see where we go from here. Back in the chat, same scale of 1 to 10. how much on average do you trust co-workers? But before you put your number in, I'm not looking for the number, I'm looking for a word. Is it more or less than strangers? More or less in the chat. Okay, mostly more is a couple of less, and I'll tell you my own advice, 2 cents worth, we don't know each other, but if you trust your co-workers less than strangers, maybe it's time to look for another job. Because usually, as you see in the chat, most people, Laura says it depends, and that's fair enough because it's an average. But let's look at the next piece of this, because it's starting to look like we've got a pattern. The more we know someone, the more we trust them. Let's test that pattern. Same scale of 1 to 10. How much on average do you trust your friends or family? And again, more than co-workers or less than co-workers? Okay, same again. More high scores. If I ask you for the number, I usually get 9s and 10s. I'm the youngest of 8 kids. There's some 1s in there. There's some 10s in there. But on average, we trust our friends and family more than our co-workers and more than strangers. And we have to ask why that's the case. And it seems to be that affinity, closeness, time together, relationship, sharing blood, being kin, is a recipe for trusting people. So far, so good. But let's now turn this professional. And let's think about the experience of meeting different types of professionals in the world. So I'm going to choose one, and I would like you in the chat to tell me, same scale of 1 to 10, how much on average do you trust salespeople? Salespeople, 1 to 10, 3s, 2s, 1s. Now, Josh didn't tell you, I'm a very proud salesperson. I teach sales at the Kellogg School of Management, but I recognize that as an industry, as a profession, dare I say, we're amongst the least trustworthy in the world. In fact, when we look at the research, we get this interesting picture, which is, no surprise to you, salespeople are the least trustworthy profession out there. And when people say, Andrew, why is that? My response is, because as salespeople, we smell. What do I mean by that? We have this commission breath. And what I really mean is the difference between why we trust nurses and doctors much more than salespeople is because we assume that nurses and doctors, although they get paid a salary, do what they do because they care about us. We assume that salespeople do what they do because they care about making a commission by selling us something we don't need on a time frame we can't afford. And it's not a great feeling to be approached by someone like that. Now, I'm guessing there are very few people on this call, this webinar, who consider themselves to be a salesperson. That's the good news. Here's the bad news. Leaders don't do terribly much better. In the surveys, they don't have a specific item for board members. So I'm putting board members and leaders in the same category. But here's what's to notice. On average, people trust leaders, especially very senior leaders, including board members, less than the person in the street. So here is the real trust issue. We believe, and I believe that you're right, that you are a trustworthy human being. If I asked you the question, same scale of 1 to 10, how much can other people trust you? I'm confident that in reality, you are people who tell the truth. You are people who have good intentions. And you are people who mostly keep your promises. And that deserves trust. The problem is, trustworthiness is a judgment that other people make about you in the milliseconds to minutes when they first meet you, based on the micro moments and not the grand gestures. So the trust issue we have is there's a gap between how trustworthy we know ourselves to be as board members and how other people judge us unfairly on false signals right at the beginning of our relationship. Sometimes to the extent that we don't even get a chance to show that we have honesty, integrity, good intentions, and an ability to deliver on our promises. So what's the implication of this? Well, the first thing is It's related to this question of whether or not people believe what we tell them. And that in turn is related to this question, how do you know what you know? So let's take a step back for a moment and think about the position of a board member. You've been asked to be a board member because you have a world of experience. And if you're an aspiring board member, the same is true too. You deserve to be there through your experience, your education, your track record, your insights, your knowledge. And your job is to bring all of that to the other board members, to the executive team, as a steward for the entire organization. And what you're being asked to do is effectively take all of what you know and have it become something that other people know and then take actions on. So if that's all true, let's go back to this question of, well, how do we know what we know? Now, this round orange pie chart, I'm going to say represents every single fact that you as a human being knows. I don't know how many facts you have in your head. My best guess is it's north of 20 billion facts. There's a lot of knowledge in your head. And just so we can have a little bit of fun in the chat, I'm going to give you a pop quiz. Let's see who gets the answer first. I'll start at a really low base. What is 2 plus 2? In the chat. Who gets it first? Okay, awesome. There's some quick fingers here. Let's raise the bar a little bit. What is the capital of Egypt? Okay, also quick fingers. Longest river in the world. What is the longest river in the world? The Nile, yes. Okay, some said the Amazon, some said the Nile. It's the Nile. The Amazon's bigger than the Nile is longer. So far, pretty good scores. Now, team, let's do something around a fact that maybe is a little bit more contentious. So in the chat, I would like you to tell me, do you believe that climate change is real? Yes or no? Okay. Now, I actually don't have a stake in whether you believe one way or another. I just care that you have a belief, and my guess is you hold that belief pretty strongly. But the question I have for you is, when you look at all these things you know, 2 plus 2 equals 4, capital of Egypt is Cairo, the longest river in the world is the Nile, and climate change is or is not true, my question is, how do you know that? Did you go to the North Pole, drill an ice core a mile long, bring it up, do the analysis and say, turns out the planet is melting, or turns out there's no evidence for that? Did you do the research firsthand, or did you, like me, believe somebody else? Believe a teacher, or watch a YouTube, or a documentary, or read a book, or a scientific paper? And the real question to reflect on is, what percentage of all your knowledge did you acquire firsthand versus what you got from somebody else? When I do the exercise, my sliver of firsthand knowledge, I've drawn it in green here, it looks like about 5%. The truth is, the more I look at this, the more convinced I become that of all the things that I know and believe strongly, maybe fewer than 0.0000001% of the facts I know, I learned firsthand. And I'd love to know for yourself, what is your own answer? Put it in the chat. What percentage of everything that you know did you acquire firsthand? What percentage versus you learned it in a book? Josh is with me. He's less than 1%. Now, some of you may be 10, 15, and I grant that there are occasions when you do something, you get a result, and you learn one of those life hard lessons. So it's pretty low, and I think I'm in good company. There's lots of you are saying the numbers between, say, 1 and 10%. So what? What's this got to do with trust? Everything. Here's why. There is a rule of life that says, first, we decide whom to trust. And that determines what we believe. As a board member, people will first decide if they trust you. And if they do, They will believe and act on, hopefully, all the wisdom that you bring. But if they decide that they don't trust you, none of your value will be appreciated, listened to, or acted on. Therefore, as board members, we have one critical job that affects everything else we do, and that is figuring out how to be judged as a trustworthy human being in the first 5 minutes when we meet somebody. Now, you may be thinking I'm exaggerating because you have heard, as I have often said, and certainly often heard, that trust takes time to build, Andrew. This is not a minutes to milliseconds problem. This is a months to years problem. In fact, you probably would identify with this picture, this graph, which says if we look at trust on the y-axis and time on the x-axis, then how things usually go is something that looks a little bit like that. We meet somebody, they're a stranger when we first meet them, so we rate them a 2 or a 3 or a 5 or a 6. And because we're a little skeptical, we take our time to get to know them. And at some point, assuming we like their behavior and it's consistent and they seem to do what they say they're going to do, we start to trust them more and more until we reach a point where there's enough trust in their trust bank account that they could say to us, here is a promise. I will do this for you, I'll do that for you, or in your case, you may make a promise about how you'll show up as a board member, and there's enough trust in your trust bank account for someone to say, I believe you, I trust you, yes. And that's the way we view life, that it's a long game to build trust. Now, does trust build over time? Of course. But the reason we believe and have experienced that trust seems to take time to build is because we don't notice that we often step into a trust hole, and that does take a long time to climb out of. What do I mean by that? Well, let's dig in a little bit. Firstly, Kevin Plank has a beautiful quote. He said, trust is built in drops and lost in buckets. So we can build a lot of trust and then do one, sometimes tiny little thing wrong. It's like kicking over the bucket and all that trust is lost. And I'm guessing, and put it in the chat if you had this experience, you've either had a long relationship and then you did something small and someone wrote you off, or someone you know did something and it really annoyed you and offended you and you wrote them off out of your life. If that's ever happened to you, or you've been on one or the other side of that transaction, give me a thumbs up or a yes in the chat. Okay, thank you. So the picture is actually more a little bit like this. We're going along building trust, and sometimes we can do a small thing like you guys, and we fall into a trust hole. Now, if we're lucky, we get to climb out of it and carry on. Oftentimes, people don't even give us a second chance. As the famous saying goes, you never get a second chance to create a fantastic first impression. But that's down the line. Let me take you back to the assessments we did earlier and remind you that most of us start out by trusting leaders and board members less than this green line, the average stranger in the street. In other words, just because of your title, just because of your position, you're in a trust hole before you even open your mouth. And you may disagree with my point of view, but if you think about why salespeople are untrusted, it's because we think they've got a self-interested motive. If you think about why leaders on that same graph are trusted less than the average stranger in the street, it's for a similar but different reason. Firstly, salespeople have a bad reputation, but so do many leaders, and we're tarred with the same brush as perhaps irresponsible other leaders. Not us, but we're suffering from the same reputation. But more than that, just like salespeople are assumed to have a hidden self-interest, leaders and board members are often assumed to have a hidden agenda. And there are all sorts of regulations and legislation and trustee obligations that make us obliged to keep information to ourselves and not share it. But when people don't share information, other people assume that our intention is bad often. Now, you may be one of those generous trust givers who assumes good intent until proven otherwise. You may live by the maxim that everyone should be assumed trustworthy until proven otherwise, but that's not how most human beings are. So the reality is, while we think we are building trust over time, what we're really doing is climbing out of a trust hole we didn't know we were put into or we stepped into when someone first met us just because of our title or our position. And that, for me, is an enormous trust issue. It's also an enormous trustworthiness opportunity. Here's why. If you can understand how people judge trustworthiness and the false signals they use, we can use that to our advantage, not to be manipulative, but to make sure that we've got an opportunity to actually demonstrate that we have integrity, we tell the truth, we have good intentions, and we keep our promises. But no one gets to see that if they don't give us enough time to prove that. And they'll only give us enough time if they have made a decision that they trust us, and that decision will happen in the blink of an eye. Not quite literally, it's typically 5 minutes until someone's first impression is formed and hardened. So what can we do about this? The first thing to notice is that trustworthiness is a formula. It's a mathematical concept in a sense. It is the product of three things: sincerity, competence, and reliability. Effectively, people are asking three questions when they see us as they meet us. Can I believe you? Can you do it? And have you done it before? Now, what's critical in this formula is two things. The first of which is trustworthiness is the product of these three things. It's sincerity times competence times reliability, not sincerity plus competence and plus reliability. In the chat, what's the implication of trustworthiness being a product of these three things rather than the sum of these three things? What do you think in the chat? Yes, Lissa says it magnifies the effect of each, tougher to score high. All of that is correct, but there's something a little even more profound than that. And it's, Lissa nailed it, but I'm going to say it a little differently. If any one of these three things is judged to be zero, there is no trustworthiness. You can be the most competent, most reliable person on the planet. You can be a super competent, reliable board member, but if people judge you to be insincere, they will write you off as untrustworthy. Is it fair? No, but it's how people work. And the second profound thing about this formula is these three things are judged in order. In other words, we first ask the question, can I believe you? And only if we decide, yes, I can. Remember, first we decide whom to trust, and then we decide to believe what they believe or what they say. So we first assess sincerity. And if you pass that test, then people will listen to and judge and possibly believe that you're competent and reliable. And so the very first job we have to do is figure out how to be judged as sincere. And the simple answer is, well, just show up as your authentic self. The problem is that doesn't often work if your authentic self is a board member who is painted with the same reputation brush as other board members and leaders, less trustworthy than strangers. So let's figure out how to win this sincerity battle. See, underneath the question, can I believe you, is two subsidiary questions. And to give you a sense of how it feels, I want you to put your mind or imagine that you're walking down Main Street in your city. I live in Chicago, it might be Michigan Avenue, and you're walking down, having a grand time, maybe with your family, and then in the distance, you see three young adults, same t-shirts, big smiles, making eye contact with clipboards. How do you feel? And what do you do? Because for most of us, we know there is a pitch coming. And we take out our phones, we turn around, we cross the street, we speed up, we do everything to avoid them. And I know it's not because you don't want to save the whales or you're not interested in their mission or purpose. It's just that they're an interruption. They're annoying you because of when they are getting in your way. It's not the time. And that's why we typically don't love being approached by salespeople. They get to interrupt us. But the questions that actually are going through your mind as you see that person coming towards you is, who are you and what do you want? The question of character and the question of motive. Put together, character and motive is what tells us someone is sincere or not. Because if we believe people have good character and good intentions, then they will be telling us the truth, being sincere with us when they open their mouths or when they make us offers. So how can we use this to our advantage? And the answer to that is, well, sometimes people judge you before you've even opened your mouth. What I'm about to say is common sense. It will be news to nobody, but it's not necessarily common practice. How do you present yourself to look trustworthy? Well, you would say, Andrew, I will approach someone with a big Duchenne smile, the one that includes your eyes, a genuine warm smile to signal that it's safe. Yes. Maybe I'll look people in the eye. That's a signal of trustworthiness. Yes, in the West. In some Asian cultures, it can be a sign of disrespect. And maybe I'll show up with an open body posture. So I'm hiding nothing, no hands in my pocket, no folded arms. And that could be a signal of being trustworthy. So yes, of course. And interviewers will tell you that 95% of the time, they've made a decision about who to hire in the first 5 minutes of the interview, sometimes before the person even gets out of the elevator. You can just see this is not the type of person who will work here. And then because we're all polite and we don't want to be seen as making quick decisions, we have the whole interview for the hour, but we've made up our minds right at the beginning. Because sometimes visual first impressions are all we need. Now, there's also this question, especially for board members, of this executive presence. And many people that teach at Kellogg and elsewhere, we all have our own definition. Mine includes this one act, which is having the courage to ask people more interesting connection questions than how are you when we first meet. What do I mean by that? Imagine that Josh and I have worked together for 15 years, and every morning I come in, I say, "Hi Josh, how are you doing?" He says, "Fine, thanks, Andrew. How are you?" And I say, "Fine, thanks." And I go to my desk. Now, whenever someone says to you, "How are you?" and your response is "fine," you know that most of the time that "fine" is a lie, because sometimes you're having a great day, sometimes you're having a terrible day, but we're so in the habit of simply responding with "fine" to the automatic question, "How are you?" that we miss the opportunity to ask people something just a little bit more interesting. Josh, I just finished reading A Short History of Nearly Everything with my kid. Loved the book. May I ask you, what's your favorite book? And Josh will share his answer. And maybe if I don't start with an anecdote, he'll ask me my own response to that. And imagine the difference. 20 years of "how are you, fine, thank you," leaves our relationship veneer thin. But 3 weeks of asking each other just a little bit more interesting connection question will surface so much of our common humanity. And it'll take Josh from being a stranger to a co-worker to someone I know better than perhaps even a spouse or a good friend. And as we saw earlier, the more we know people, the more we trust them. But knowing means we feel we're the same in some way. And if ever there was an antidote to sexism, racism, ageism, all the isms, it's surfacing the things we have in common. And all it takes is a tiny little personal, appropriate, but personal question. That's what I mean by executive presence. And last but not least, what can you do before you open your mouth? Be present. Means be on time. Of course, I told you common sense, but I really mean being fully present with someone, because we love great listeners. Let me demonstrate. In the chat, please, I would like you to share a name or the person, like mom, dad, cousin, who you consider to be a really good listener? It may be a hard question for some of you. So Greg's got his wife. Thank you, Greg. Sister, mom, husband, partner, best friend. Okay. So if you've got someone in mind, and it's important that you think of a specific person, here's my next question. In the chat, what's one word that captures how you feel about this person, the emotion towards them? What's that feeling? Calm, John, thank you. Warmth, connected, trust, love, respect, secure, emotionally close, trust, all of those things. Love again, love. Team, I've asked, I think, nearly 13,000 people this question. You know what I've never heard? My friend James is a phenomenal listener. Hate his guts. No one ever says that. It's always love, respect, kindness, calm, all the things you've mentioned. It speaks to a rule. We love great listeners. We trust great listeners because they give us the thing we love the most, the opportunity to talk about ourselves. And as board members, we're hired to bring our opinions and our points of view, but sometimes having all the answers is not the best answer. Being an extraordinary listener is. I come from South Africa, where you may know Nelson Mandela was president from 1994 for 2 terms. He was known as one of the world's best listeners. And when people said to him, Mandela, when I'm in your company, it feels like there's just the 2 of us. There's hundreds of people around. How do you do that? How did you become such a great listener? He said, I watched my father, the chief of our village, and every time there was a village meeting, he would allow everyone else to speak first before choosing to speak himself. And that's a phenomenal life hack. At a board meeting, if you allow everyone else to speak first, you can hear all their input so that when you come to share your point of view, you've considered everyone else's view. It's a recipe for being the smartest person in the room. But more than that, it's a recipe for being a phenomenal listener. Because being a phenomenal listener begins, it certainly doesn't end, but it begins with the choice to be silent. Quieten the voice in your head as well as close your mouth to give yourself the opportunity to listen, to be present. So far, so obvious. Before you open your mouth, how you present yourself. And then when you do open your mouth, how you make small talk. I wish it wasn't called small talk, because most identity trust happens in small talk. And of course, being present to what people say, remembering names. You might think of yourself as someone who's not good at remembering names. It's not that you've got a bad memory, it's that we have bad technique. Best way to remember someone's name is when they share it with you, play it back 3 times in an interesting way. Josh says, hi, my name is Josh Palmer. I say, Josh, so awesome to meet you. Is that short for Joshua? Do you spell it Josh? I've got a cousin, Josh, one of my favorite people in the world. You find something inventive as a way to repeat it back. You may not remember someone's name forever, but you will for the next hour, or certainly the length of a board meeting. So that's so far so obvious, so common sense, just not common practice. But there's a moment, and this is very true for new board members or new people that you meet. There is a moment in every meeting when someone annoying like me says, let's go around the room and introduce ourselves. And most people, if you're a professional, will meet somewhere between 5,000 and 15,000 people in your life. Given that 90+% of identity trust is assessed in the first 5 minutes, doesn't it behoove you to practice, polish, and perfect the way you answer that question? Because for most of us, we make it up as we go along. And the impact is we blow an opportunity to build trust. I'm going to demonstrate that, and then I'll share a formula, a framework that you can use when next you're introducing yourself. But before I do that, here's the scenario. Let's imagine that tomorrow you have surgery. And you're nervous about it, as you can expect, but you have a great health plan, and as a result, you've got a choice of 2 physicians. Physician A and Physician B. And I'd like you to decide, who would you like to operate on you? Physician A walks in and you say, tell me a little bit about yourself. And physician A says, my name is Dr. Sykes. I got my degree at Harvard. And then I've worked at some of the biggest and best hospitals in the world, Mass General. Then I came to Northwestern University Hospital. I've been doing surgery for 20 years. I've done this procedure 20,000 times. I get fantastic clinical outcomes. In fact, I'm the highest paid in my industry because I'm so good. And I can't wait to cut you open tomorrow. Or physician B, you say, tell me a little bit about yourself. And he says, my name is Dr. Sykes. I got my degree from Northwestern, but the reason I do what I do is because when I was 10 years old, my older brother died from this disease. And I promised myself no other family would suffer that same loss. I'm looking forward to working with you tomorrow. Heidi's already put it in the chat, Dr. 2, hands down. And Heidi, I'm with you because we're suckers for a story. Now, the truth is, the information that you had told you Dr. A had better clinical outcomes, had done the procedure more often. Thanks, Tom and Michelle, for noticing that. But for most of us, we'll take a story over facts and figures all day long. Now, the truth is, it doesn't have to be a choice because Dr. B could have shared his experience and his clinical outcomes. But we trust motive more than competence because we're looking for signs of sincerity before we're looking for evidence of competence. So how might you introduce yourself in a way that has people drop their jaws and tell themselves the answer to the question, who are you and what do you want, in a way that serves you, in a way that has them believe you deserve trust and the time and space to demonstrate that you can be trusted. Here's how. The next time someone asks you to introduce yourself, please share just 3 sentences. Sentence 1, the briefest, and I mean the briefest summary of your credible past. You may be saying, but Andrew, you said not to start with credibility, to start with sincerity. And the answer is, yes, you're right. So this is not a resume dump. This is just context for the story to come. Like it was a dark and stormy night is context for the story. It positions you where you are. So you may say, especially if you're a board member, you may have 20, 30, 40, 50 years of experience. You could say something simple like, I've had the honor of working for 5 of the world's leading law firms over my 3 decades of experience. Brief, because the gold is the second sentence. And that is what I call the poignant pivot. It's the answer to the question, why do you do what you do? What's your motive? And it's usually based on something that changed or happened or that you realized. So it could sound something like, I was the CEO of a manufacturing company for 25 years. And what I saw was the enormous gap between what the board wished for the company and what the frontline employees understood to be the strategy. And so I decided to become one of those board members who would not only share my point of view, but be responsible for that point of view going right through the organization. Whatever it is that drives you to be a board member, we assume our good intention is visible. It's not. So share why you do what you do. Now, given how impressive you are as individuals, the danger is you will look too impressive. So how do you humanize yourself with a final sentence that speaks about not what you do? No one cares about your title, honestly. No one really cares about how you do what you do. They care about your impact on the world. So you might say something like, and today I have the privilege of sitting on ABC board and helping that company bring life-saving drugs to the people who really need it. So ask yourself the question, not what's your role as a board member, but what part of this biggest impact that the companies or organizations you serve can you humbly be a small part of? Putting it together, it might sound like my educational background is in actuarial science, which is not why no one invites me to parties. Feel free to be self-deprecating. But after 3 decades of practicing as an actuary, what I saw was nothing happens in a business until something gets sold. And so I chose to study, to become, and finally to teach the art of sales and leadership. And today I have the privilege of teaching those things at one of the leading business schools where we help board leaders become the brave leaders that change the world. You will have to find your own language, and team, the truth is, this is not an easy exercise. Getting your origin story, as I call it, polished, practiced, and perfected takes some repetition, some feedback from people. And what's predictable is tomorrow someone will say, tell me a little bit about yourself, and you'll do what you've always done. And the truth is, it'll be good. But the difference between good and extraordinary is the difference between someone judging you as 5 or 6 trustworthy and someone being ready to, take my children, send them back as pro golfers. Like, trust you with their lives or their children's lives. And you may be doubting that kind of trust is built in the milliseconds to minutes when we meet someone. But all the research in trust says most identity trust is a 5-minute phenomenon. There is, though, the trust that's called performance trust, which is trust that we build in people by seeing them make and keep their promises. And again, we got trust issues because my sense is that you believe what I believed, which is, as long as I make my promises and then keep my promises, people will trust me. As it turns out, that rule, as sensible as it is, fails. Because people don't judge us based on whether or not we keep our promises. They judge us based on whether or not we meet their expectations, even and especially when they haven't shared those expectations. So being the most trustworthy board member involves choosing to live your life with this mindset. Part A, I am a walking promise. The way I look, the way I introduce myself, the way I speak, and what I say is effectively communicating a promise of what's expected of me. But more than that, when I make an explicit promise to do A by B with the help from C, when I make what I call a clean promise, even then it's not enough. Because people will have expectations of us over and above that, and they may be scared to tell us those expectations because of your exalted position, but they won't be scared to judge you for missing those expectations. So the last thing I want to share with you today is what I call the responsible promise habit. It is the antidote to being judged based on people's expectations of you, and it is your secret weapon to being the most trustworthy human on the planet. Let me show you what I mean by that. When we make promises, most people, frankly, make kind of sloppy promises. So we can already upgrade the quality of our promises by being very clear about the conditions that need to be true for the person to whom we're making a promise, the board members, the CEO, the shareholders, what we'll do, why we'll do it, how we'll do it, when we'll do it, all of those things that you would say, Andrew, these things are obvious. They should be part of a promise. Now, there's one I do want to point out. When we make promises, we tend to say things like, I'll get you the report by Friday. And you may have had this experience when you deliver the report on Friday at 5 p.m., but the person you're delivering it to expected it at 8 a.m. and they're mad with you and you're indignant because you actually did what you thought you said, but you missed what they thought you said. So the first part of being responsible is being very pedantic about who you will make the promise to and who will do the work to deliver it, what exactly you and the other people will do when you're making a promise, if others are involved, when you'll do it, by how you'll do it, and the specific deliverables. But the thing that doesn't occur to most of us is to also explain why we're making our promise. Because if I made you a promise that doesn't have the why behind it, you're going to make an assumption. And more often than not, you'll assume there's self-interest involved. So next time you make a promise, be sure to say, you know, the reason I'm making this promise is I'm committed to making sure that this board runs super effectively, or whatever it is that is your commitment. And I trust that you have honorable commitments, so share them. But that's the easy part. Even and especially when you keep these so-called clean promises, you may still miss the difference between what you promised and what people expect of you, even when they haven't said something. Now, this is the root of what I consider to be some of the worst advice in trust. You may have heard this. Andrew, under promise, over deliver. Or in another format, make a promise, then surprise and delight people. In practice, that's not bad advice, at least on the surface. But there are two really dark side effects of that. The first is you're guessing. If you promised me, or if I promised you X, and you're expecting Y, and I, with good intentions, I come along and I don't only deliver X, but I deliver X plus Z, hoping to surprise and delight you, I'll miss the mark. When all it would have taken is this single habit. Next time I make you a promise, I follow it with this one question. What else do you trust me to do? Or what else do you expect me to do? And don't expect that people will have a great answer to that question. So you may need to seed the conversation and say, for example, do you expect me to follow certain quality standards or give you an update on progress so you're not worrying about it? Maybe you even need to make promises about or ask about the expectations of your way of being. Like, how do you want me to do this? Do you want me to call you honorable board members, or is you guys okay? Because if you ask what people's expectations are, you can say yes to them, you can say no to them, or you can negotiate them. But if you don't ask, you're going to be judged for them. So, team, two things that I wanted to communicate today. The first is being the most trustworthy board member begins by designing, practicing, and polishing a personal origin story and your first impression. Because people will judge you in the milliseconds to minutes when they first meet you, and that impression will last through time. It's super difficult to change, which is why we tell ourselves the lie that trust takes time to build when most of it is earned in those first 5 minutes. Assuming you nail that, the second opportunity to build trust, performance trust, comes in the way that we make and keep promises. But most of us either make sloppy promises, or even if we make clean promises, who will do what by when and how, we forget to explain why, and people care about our motive. But most alarmingly, it doesn't occur to us to ask, what else do you trust me to do? And if you can add that into your promise, you now have a secret weapon, because you know something that other people expect from you that no one else on your board does. Because you had the presence, the habit to ask, what else do you trust me to do? Team, that is all I wanted to share today. You know, and you've heard Stephen Covey say, business proceeds at the speed of trust. I would say board meetings proceed at the speed of the trustworthiness that people judge you to have. I'm honored that you joined me. If you'd like to be part of our trust newsletter, trust us, we don't sell anything, it's just our research. Please scan that QR code. We'd love to have you join us. A big thank you to OnBoard for trusting us to lead this webinar today. As a professional speaker, I love having an audience and talking to you all, and so thank you for trusting me with your time. And for those of you who commented in the chat, thank you for the conversation we had. I hope that we'll develop a relationship. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Have a wonderful day, and I trust you to become the most trustworthy board member in every meeting every day. Thank you.
Andrew, thank you so much. This is probably, I've been doing this for 2 years, and this is probably one of my favorite presentations ever. So thank you. I think the audience here agrees with me. We do have a couple minutes if there are any audience questions. We do have the 10-second poll up as promised. Now I'm like overthinking promises. Short of an audience question, I'm curious, this seems, and from somebody who studies brand and brand marketing, this seems to be really built into the evolutionary psychology of our brains, the whole speed trust thing of just making quick decisions. Is that, I'm sure we could go several layers down there, but is that what the origin story of this quick trust is?
Yeah, and as a brand, we've also got an origin story for our company. But a brand, in my view, is nothing more or less than the promise that people expect us to keep.
Mm-hmm.
So if we've got a track record of producing a certain value in the world, well, that becomes people's expectations.
Yeah.
And then, so yes, 100% agree.
That's great. Well, Andrew, thank you so much. Again, one of my favorite presentations ever. Really happy you were able to join us today. Anybody still has a poll number, there is an opportunity beyond the QR code that Andrew shared to have Andrew reach out for his habits at work thing. But otherwise, thank you so much, Andrew, and we'll let you get back to your afternoons. We will share the slides and a recording to the email you registered with. But thank you again for joining this Atlas Leadership Series session. All right, thank you.